Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Crisis Sigil, Small Towns. Crisis Sigil is the grindcore side project of Ada Rook, who is probably best known as being a member of the now defunct band Black Dresses, and I initially discovered her and her music through the newest Black Dresses record, Peaceful as Hell, that came out earlier this year. Still one of my favorite records of the year so far. Definitely give that a listen if you haven't done so already. She also put out a solo album under her own name earlier this year, which was also really fantastic too. So with that in mind, I was really excited to see what she was going to do on this new record here, and also considering the fact that the previous release from this music project was also pretty great, I was just especially excited to see what this album was going to deliver. Overall, Small Towns ends up being another really great addition to her musical output this year. I feel like this is, yet again, another fantastic project. This record only has 8 tracks. It's about 13 minutes or so in length, with each song here being about a minute or two in length overall. But just because this record is one that's pretty short, doesn't mean that there isn't a lot packed into these tracks. And believe me, there is quite a lot going on here in all of these songs on this project. One thing I really appreciate about this record is that in some ways it does continue with a lot of the ideas that were present on the self-titled release from last year, but at the same time it also mixes in a lot of new ideas too that I think give this record a lot of character and keep this thing, like I said before, really interesting throughout its entire run. Probably one of the biggest changes here on this record compared to the self-titled is the guitar tone here on this thing, which is a lot heavier, a lot thicker. It's just a lot more present here, I guess. It's just probably the most immediate thing when listening to a lot of these songs on first listen. That very thick guitar sound is going to be the thing that's hitting you most. And while I could certainly see why some people wouldn't necessarily be a fan of this guitar sound, personally, I think it works here in the context of this record, as it provides this very suffocating feel that I think pairs up really nicely with a lot of the lyrics here on the project. And I think it still allows for a lot of the other instrumental moments on this project and the vocals to still shine through enough to actually, do what they're trying to accomplish. Overall, I think the guitar sound on this thing is pretty nice. Aside from the guitars, another thing I really like about the sound of this record is the kind of industrial sound that's mixed into a few of the tracks here on this thing. It's not present to the point of being overbearing or making this thing like an industrial record overall, I would say, but it's in there just enough to add a little extra flavor to some of these songs. Like, for example, the opening track to this thing, Weapon, the start of this song, the percussion here kind of has this almost industrial-like feel to it. You also have these screams that are mixed into the track. I'm not sure if they're like sampled from something or if they were made specifically for the context of this record, but they still sound pretty good regardless. And then the closing track to this record, Away, is another moment on the project where I feel like the industrial elements are pretty prominent, probably the most prominent on the entire record. Just some of the drum work here on this thing has a very industrial tone to it. And then towards the very end of this track, these guitars here just become particularly overbearing to the point where they start to almost sound fuzzy and kind of staticky. And it's just another moment here on this project where I feel like the guitar tone really adds to the feel of the record. And I think the outro to this track is really just great. Another thing I like about this record is that it's just not constant aggression and brutality through and through. There's some moments here on this record, particularly in the second half of the record, where there are some moments where the very abrasive and overbearing instrumentals are kind of stripped back a little bit to give the listener maybe a little bit of peace for just a very short amount of time, but enough time to have the impact it's trying to have, particularly on tracks like Small Towns and Light, for example. There are some moments where the guitars just tone it back a lot, the vocals become a lot cleaner, you could actually kind of pick up a bit more on what the lyrics are trying to say, and the sound of these moments is very pleasant, and I think it provides a nice break between some of the more abrasive moments here on these tracks. Not only that, but the title track here on this thing has a moment towards the very end where you have this spoken word passage. The instrumental during this portion of the song isn't aggressive or heavy whatsoever. It's a lot more stripped back. Just another really cool, kind of odd moment on this thing that adds a ton of character to the record as a whole. And then you have the track Shape, which is also a pretty odd song here on the record. The sound of this track is fairly different from most of the other songs here, I feel. It almost has this more straightforward rock feel to it. The riff still has this very thick, overbearing sound to it, but Rook's vocals here on certain parts of the track are a lot cleaner, even though the instrumental is a bit heavier. The riff has this kind of groovy feel to it that I think isn't super out of place maybe in like a more straightforward rock song, like I said before. Though there are still moments here on this track where that really straightforward, aggressive grindcore sound still comes through at points. I think it leads to one of the most interesting and best moments on the entire record. I think Shape is one of the best songs here. The vocals here on this record are consistently fantastic, whether it be in the harshest moments on this thing where Rook's screams and shouts are just visceral and cutting, or maybe on some of the more stripped back moments that occasionally pop up in here. Like I said before, her clean vocals still sound really great. Overall, the vocal performances here are just excellent. And the lyrics here on this record are another part of this project that I think are really interesting. On the Bandcamp page for this release, in the description, it notes that that the record is a short story about small towns, and I'm guessing the short story is, I guess, being told through the lyrics of the record, obviously. And reading through the lyrics of this project, I can definitely see what the description here might be trying to allude to, kind of talking about small towns, maybe living in a small town, and some of the negative things that come out of that. Like I said before when talking about the guitars here on this project, there's this very overbearing, suffocating feel to the guitar sound on this project, and really just the record as a whole. And I think that works really nicely with some of the lyrics here on this record, because it sounds here in the lyrics like the narrator is in this situation where it's almost suffocating or overbearing. There's a lot of negative emotions being discussed here in relation to this particular small town. Like, for example, on the title track here on the record, the opening lines to the song are, "I can't tell my dreams apart from my nightmares, home or hell." And I mean, I think that right there really sums up a lot of what this record might be trying to go for from a lyrical perspective, kind of being in this hellish, kind of suffocating, small town, home-like environment. And then on the closing track to the record, "Away," lyrically this track seems to be talking about getting away from the small town in question, you know, talking about how she packs her bags, so long waiting for this day. It just seems, maybe from a lyrical perspective, like a kind of upbeat moment here on the record, even if instrumentally, like I mentioned before, this is one of the most overbearing tracks on the entire project. I think that's a pretty interesting mix of sounds there, but I think from a lyrical standpoint, this song does a really good job at being, you know, a conclusion to this record from a narrative standpoint. The lyrics to the opening track on the album, "Weapon," are also pretty interesting too. I kind of interpreted the lyrics here as being about maybe being made to be a certain way based on the small town in which one grows up in, you know, because if you grow up in a small town or something like that, you're going to be influenced by the dominant culture in that location just because of how small it is. And, you know, maybe that particular culture isn't necessarily the greatest to live in. Maybe it even makes people bad people, hateful people, things like that, and hence the whole weapon part of this track and kind of talking about being made into a weapon. At least that's how I interpret it. Maybe I'm completely off the mark with that, and, you know, maybe I'm completely off the mark with all of my interpretations of the lyrics here, but I still felt like the lyrics here on this project were really interesting. I think they're certainly worth giving a read to, because I'm guessing you won't be able to understand most of it just by listening to the project, given the vocal delivery style here on this thing. But yeah, the lyrics here on this record are pretty fantastic, as is really everything about this record overall. So yeah, Small Towns is a pretty great record in my opinion. Like I said before, the instrumentals on this thing are really great, the lyrics are really great, the vocal performances are really great too. There's a lot of good ideas packed into this thing as well, despite the fact that this record is overall a pretty short one. Yeah, it's just a really enjoyable listen from start to finish. And if you're a fan of this kind of music, you like really aggressive, straightforward music, then I think that this is certainly worth giving a listen to. So yeah, definitely check this thing out. It's a great record. I definitely recommend it. But that concludes everything I had to say about this record today. Everything I said here is my own personal opinion, so if you happen to disagree, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own thoughts on this album in the comments section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you also leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, discussion videos, countdown lists, things of that sort. If you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Again, thank you for watching, and stay golden.